So even in primary school and then later in school, there was always at least three of us, three Frank Muellers and more. So one of my teachers at some stage said, oh, you've got a middle name, Olaf. All right, so I'm going to call you FOM. This is where the FOM comes from, right? Like FOM. So when I went to Australia, I went, oh, that's great. Finally, I get rid of this FOM thing, right? Except then I was employed by someone who was Frank Mueller. So the whole office went, so what are we going to do now? I went, okay, here's a story. You can do this. And then I became FOM and he became Big Frank. And over the years...
And you became Grumpy Frank.
I always was Grumpy Frank, right? But nobody wanted to say that, right? He was also from Hamburg, right? So it always ended up people ringing. And can I speak to Frank? Which one? Frank Mueller. Yeah, which one? Well, the German. Yeah, from Hamburg. Okay, which one? So it was like a never-ending story, right?
Welcome back to Project Cargo Professionals. This week's guest is Frank O Mueller. You can call him FOM or Grumpy Frank, he doesn't mind. A long-serving AAL executive tells us about his journey from Hamburg to Brisbane, why the company refused to abandon its trade routes during COVID, and how their new vessels are opening up new opportunities. Frank's is a story of staying power, smart engineering, and empowering your people. Stay with us as we head down under. Frank, I know you're from Germany, but you've been in Australia a very long time. Mm-hmm. What's the appeal? What's kept you in Australia?
The country. I mean, I didn't go over there for shipping, right? So I actually went over there to start, not even to start a new life. I was an exchange student years back, and then we thought we'd do something different. So we went to Australia. And yeah, it's a great country. It's a great country to, especially to have a family, raise kids and all that. And then in my job, it was just perfect. Yeah. It's different to Europe. People think it's very much like Europe, but it's not.
So you enjoy living in Brisbane?
I do. Even after 25 years, I can't handle the summers there. It's like too hot and muggy. I don't know if you've ever been there.
I have. Yeah. What's the best thing about living in Brisbane?
It's very relaxed. And I know it sounds silly because we also had some people from our head office over the years going, oh, you always just sit on the beach and you're just surfing and all that. And then you always have to pull out the map and say, there are no beaches in Brisbane, so we're not sitting on the beach.
Yeah, but they're not that far away.
Well, yeah, but, you know, it's still an hour's drive to get to a proper beach, right? Whether you go Sunshine Coast or Gold Coast. So, but, yeah, it's a nice city. It's not too hectic. It's relaxing. Arguably, it's probably not the shipping mecca of Australia. That's probably more Sydney and Melbourne, which, again, you know, puts us a bit outside as AAL because we've always been in Brisbane. And we were the only ones for years that were, or still are the only ones of the bigger carriers that sit in Brisbane, have their head office in Brisbane. So
I was just about to ask you, is it a good location to be for Project Cargo? Are there forwarders there, or what's the community like in Brisbane?
There are forwarders, there are project forwarders, but, you know, realistically, we travel all over the country to see these guys. And a lot of our business is also with overseas customers and booking desks and chartering desks. So, and being in Rotterdam and New Orleans and Houston and everywhere where we try to be present also at these conferences, right, and breakaway conferences and stuff.
Yeah. So tell us a bit about your background, your early career, and how you got into shipping.
Yeah, how did I get into shipping? I've been in shipping for 30 plus years, I think now, and it wasn't anything I planned to do. And I don't have a family background of shipping. So initially I studied naval engineering because I was always fascinated by ships and maritime transport and all that. And I just found that too, I don't want to say boring, but it just wasn't me. And my best friend's dad was a shipbroker. So somehow I came into that and did my apprenticeship. In Germany, we've got a 3-year trainee apprenticeship to become a shipbroker. Otherwise, you're not even allowed to work in that field. Same as the UK, I think. It fascinated me from the beginning because I thought it's one of these very few careers where you can be guaranteed an international context. Not necessarily living somewhere or working somewhere else, but at least dealing with people in other countries and all that. So that was, for me, that was the really interesting part in it. And yeah, so I ended up doing my traineeship, working for a container carrier, or like an agent for a container carrier, and then later on for container carrier CP ships and Canmar Conship in Germany. And that was pretty much how I started in shipping and transport.
And you've obviously been with AAL for a long time now?
Yeah, coming up 25 years. Having said that, I didn't go over to Australia for AAL. I went there on my own, or we went there with my partner. We went there together. And I started my career with AAL in Brisbane later on.
And obviously, AAL is known as a heavy lift specialist. How does your company differentiate yourself from other lines that we know in the heavy lift market?
What other lines do you know in the heavy lift market?
Well,
that would be my question,
there are
right?
a couple of others.
If you say carriers, I do agree. I think we've positioned ourselves well with we've got different tonnage to most of the other carriers that are around. We are basically driven by this tonnage, trying to offer a regular framework. Some people would call it liner service. It's maybe more semi-liner service or trade routes where we are very dominant and where we try to sort of stick to and then work around these rather than being a solution for someone like the one-trick pony, basically, like, just do this or just do that. We sort of try to encompass everything. And because we have these fixed trade routes, we sort of are able to employ slightly larger tonnage than most other carriers.
So in terms of the size of the cargo, what's your kind of typical profile customer?
Everyone who doesn't want their stuff in containers comes to us, right? Now, I know it sounds silly, but it's a bit like me trying to explain to people, what are you doing? Shipping? Containers. No. End of conversation, right?
Yeah.
So people know containers when you talk shipping. What we do is it starts with 50 tons of steel from Asia to Australia to, I don't know, ship loaders or wind turbines and blades, everything. So it's really, I always try to say whatever doesn't fit in a container or people don't want in a container, that's what we carry. It's not necessarily just this one cargo, this one parcel that we want. We try to mix the things up as well and put it together.
And what makes a good project cargo carrier, in your opinion?
It may sound a bit cheesy, but it is our tagline. It's the partnership. I think, yes, if you're a project cargo carrier and heavy lift carrier, yes, obviously you have the equipment and you have the expertise and all that. So obviously this is something that you should have. Otherwise you wouldn't even be there. What makes someone good is this partnership, like working together with the EPCs, with the forwarders, with your customers to really make the things happen. And by having deep discussions and good relationship, you manage to avoid problems. And if problems happen, solve them quickly. I think that's the main point that differentiates AAL from other carriers in the same segment, that we actually are approachable and we see our clients not as clients, but as partners in the business.
And I think you've got that because you've got a lot of people like yourself that have been there a long time.
Yes.
It's not like people are, coming and going every 5 minutes. So you have got that continuity with your clients.
We do, and we have, like Brisbane now, we've got 3 people over 30 years with the company. Then we've got 20 years. Like it's enormous. Brisbane was our head office since 1995 until we moved it overseas. Now we also have staff members in other countries having their 10-year anniversary, right? So, and I think in a shipping company or in a freight forwarding company or in our total arena, people tend to jump a lot.
They do.
And we manage to sort of keep our staff and keep our people, and they actually grow with the company.
Why do you think they stay? Apart from the huge salaries.
Yeah. Where's that? I think our whole culture is different. We are a family-owned company, and we have this family vibe within the company. People are, I don't want to use that word, but people are empowered to actually do what they need to do and want to do. And I think if you have people that are empowered and can do what they want to do the way they think it's right without being micromanaged and controlled, they start to thrive. And the support we get also from our shareholders and our top management is so great that people get all the freedom they want, and at the same time they can make decisions and they see things moving, and it's just very satisfying to do that, right? And I think the grass is always greener on the other side, and some people have tried it, and a lot of people came back and said, I should have stayed with you because of X, Y, Z. So it's just, hierarchy is not big thing in AAL. Everybody can say their opinion. We listen to everyone. And I think it's just this openness that we have in the company, the, silly open door policy. Yes, but ours is like an open office, open across the offices policy, really. And that's why I think people stay, right?
And we hear a lot in this part of the world about the problems with recruiting people and staff shortages. What does that look like in Australia?
Similar, which is another advantage. If you have people staying for a long time, you don't have to go through the motion of trying to find people, right? But
So you've
yeah,
got the
we've
same
got
problems
the
over
same
there.
problems over there. Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
And can you tell us about any recent projects that maybe you guys have been involved in from Australia?
Well, of course, we have a couple of wind farms that we bring in for some of the bigger clients, tunnel boring machines, because there's a lot of infrastructure happening. There's a snowy hydro project where we're bringing in tunnel boring machines. Australia is quite an interesting place because you've got all the entry ports are quite defined. And it's not like, let's say, Europe or whatever, where you say, if I can't go through that port, I go to the other port. If I can't get Hamburg, I go to Bremen or I go to Antwerp or Rotterdam, right? Like if you want to go somewhere in Queensland, you go to Brisbane, end of story. And so these intricacies of the whole Australia setup and project setup are very unlike any other place in the world, I think. I don't know, maybe South America and Africa would be the same, but there's a lot less flexibility in the market. So if we say we bring a project in, then we're concentrating on that. And
So you're saying if you've got a particular type of cargo, it has to go to a particular port, for example?
it's probably more if you have a particular destination, because, a lot of these final destination of the cargo are inland, right? And
Yeah.
the routing is one thing, but then for the forwarders to find an entry port, it's a very limited number of ports, right?
And what's the project cargo market in Australia like at the moment generally? Are the forwarders doing good business, or how is the sector doing?
I think they are. We are bringing in a lot of stuff for them, so I hope they make some money on that as well. Australia, I think, had a bit of a lull, but it's all ramping up. Don't forget, we also have the Olympic Games coming up in 32 in Brisbane. And again, a lot of infrastructure, a lot of renewable energy from battery units over wind turbines and all that. So no, it's an interesting time.
Yeah, and your Asia-Australia liner trade has run continuously since the 1990s, even during COVID. Why do you think that's been so successful?
Because we made a conscious decision, especially during COVID, that we stick to our guns. And we have offered this liner service or semi-liner service for, 20 years. And we're not going to just chase the money and divert all our vessels to other places, but we deliberately said, no, we want to stick to this liner service because, our customers, our clients, our, again, partners rely on us to offer that service. And even for us, it was a hard time because capacity was very scarce, even on our vessels, bookings left, right, and center. And yes, I know it sounds good, like, oh, yeah, made enough money. Yeah, but there's also a lot of cost associated with it. We had a lot of waiting times in ports. We had, stevedoring costs going up and everything. So juggling the cargo, you wouldn't believe how many new friends we had that have always been our friends, and they all of a sudden came up again because they couldn't get any cargo on any space on a container carriers and others, right? So I do think people don't forget that, right? Yes, there will always be pressure and discussions on rates and all that, but people realize that we are not only there in the good times, but also when they need us. And that's, again, what's the point of promoting a partnership if you just chase the dollars and you just run off and leave people there, right? Because they need some transportation somehow, right?
So that actually added a lot of goodwill.
Yes. Yeah, it is goodwill in the sense that, I think we did help people to continue their businesses on the ground, even though there were delays and hiccups and all that, right? And shortages of goods that people were importing. But, if we would have also followed the trend of diverting vessels and carrying containers on multipurpose vessels, then it would have looked even worse for these people, right?
And the major challenges that you see at the moment, what's the hardest thing?
In general, reminding people of that you've done all this before, and like, I get it, like rates are coming down and all that, other carriers are coming back in and trying to get the cargo, and it's a short-term memory that people have, unfortunately. Whereas if you offer a solution that looks better on paper because it's purely cheaper, you need to convince people about the whole story around it. Not only that, do you know if that carrier is going to be there tomorrow or not, but also what else are you getting? What service are you getting? Our business is not just a container from A to B, right? There's more to it. And to have people understand this and actually come back to you and start a discussion and then realize, okay, yes, I may have to pay a bit more, but I'm also getting a lot more. I'm making my life a lot easier if I use that carrier over that carrier. I do think a lot of our business, and that is worldwide, is educating, if I can use that word. It sounds a bit arrogant, but letting people know that with us, you're not just buying space on a ship to go from A to B, right? You're getting a lot bigger package.
What do you think we learned from COVID?
That's an interesting question. I think COVID causes memory loss because people tend to forget what happened then, right? As I alluded to earlier, right? It's like we've tried to really be consistent in what we were doing, and again, people start to forget that, right? But also, I think in general, supply chains have now become a lot more resilient. People are looking at other options. Having said that, if something like COVID happens again, and the measures to fight COVID are the same as they were used last time or this time, you will still see congestion in ports. And also, so in theory, everything will repeat itself because, nothing's going to change. If you're going to get people to work in the port, you'll have delays working the vessels, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So I can only hope that collectively, as across the world, we have learned a bit of a lesson. And now I'm not questioning the action that individual governments took. But in hindsight, maybe some could have been different. But hindsight is always great, right? So most of them were probably appropriate at the time. Now that we've gone through something like this, maybe next time it's going to be slightly different and we have less restrictions overall.
Yeah. And now there are a lot of other different problems, the situation in the Red Sea, US trade policy. How do you see that from Australia? How's that affecting you?
It does not affect our business in Australia directly. But of course, as the group, as AAL Shipping, of course, we have issues bringing vessels in time because now we have to go around the Cape rather than through Suez. And, we have to look at so many different things. We sometimes have to take a vessel out of the semi-liner service to Australia and put it in another service because we have to meet lay days and then replace it with a vessel out of that service again. But then that's going to be potentially late because it's stuck going around the Cape. It's a lot more juggling than before. But the interesting part in shipping is if you create a disruption, let's say Suez, it takes a while, but then our industry adapts to it. Because now all of a sudden, yes, it's a disruptor when all of a sudden you have to divert vessels around the Cape. But once all the vessels go around the Cape, you're back to normal in a way, right?
And in terms of what the US is doing, is that making your customers change their operations or their sourcing or their planning? What are your customers doing?
I think it's too early to say that because people are still waiting, right? Like it's like a daily, weekly, 3-monthly change. I think once the dust settles a bit and then people will see what the negotiations bring and, where can they source cargo and where can they source their products and how they're going to move them. But at this stage, I think it's a bit more sitting back and wait and see how it all develops.
And tell us a bit about AAL's new building program, where you are with that.
So we are at number 6 out of 8. The last 2 are going to be a bit delayed. They're going to come in next year. Yeah, we're quite happy that these vessels are now finally, after we had them on the drawing board for a while, are actually seeing action, and they're seeing more action than we expected. I think the whole company didn't expect these vessels to be so successful and so in demand as they are. Like people actually knocking at the door trying to, do you have more of these? When are they coming out? So,
why are they so in demand? What are the features why are they so attractive?
So we had our in-house engineering team in Singapore really developing these vessels based on our experience over the last 30 years and what we need and what we think we need going forward. And they've got some unique features that we hadn't had in our fleet before, right? Apart from the lifting capacity that's still at 350 tons and soon 400 and then 800 combinable. But, we've got features like the Eco Deck. But for me, the biggest difference to what we've done historically as AAL is that we've got the superstructure forward, which then leaves a massive deck, which allows us to carry a lot of oversized cargo, let's say blades, barges, other stuff. They are also designed by our engineers to be able to sail open hold. So we actually have some cargoes that cranes and similar that we put on the tank top and leave the holes open. So reducing the air draft of that cargo, which is unique in the area where we operate.
And will they allow you to expand your scope, or is it just more of the same?
it has already allowed us to expand the scope because we are carrying cargo that we weren't technically able to carry, or we can carry more of that cargo. Again, I take the example of wind blades or wind products where we can carry more in one sailing, making them a lot more ecologically and economically viable than the vessels we have at the moment. Having said that, the A class, which are our 30,000 deadweight ton vessels that we've operated for the last 10 years, they still do the job they were designed to do, and we're still carrying cargo on these vessels as well. So it's not that they're going to replace these, but I think we figured out that the new Super B class will be the type going forward, which is going to dominate at least in our view, going to dominate the project market.
And shipping is obviously under pressure to decarbonize. How is AAL approaching that?
It's a bit of a tricky subject, I think, because it's not quite clear how you're going to do that, right? Because even though there are different ideas for fuels and, methanol, ammonia, I think what we can do at the moment, not only as AAL, but collectively as an industry, is trying to reduce emissions. And the easiest way to reduce emissions is to reduce consumption. So you look at special hull coating that allows you to burn less fuel. But our vessels, the new ones at least, they are already prepared to be dual fuel, use new fuels that may become available.
Yeah.
But at this stage, our industry as a total is so small. I think we really have to rely on the bigger shipping industries, i.e. container carriers and bulkies, to actually show the way forward, because what's the use if you're a small or relatively small project carrier and then you don't have the supply of the fuel worldwide, right? So unless there's the demand, and the demand has to come from the bigger carriers or container, bulk, ro-ro, once that demand is there for a different fuel, then of course I think all the project carriers and others will fall into that line. But at the moment I think it's a bit of still a waiting game, right? Not forgetting that, which is the tricky bit in our industry, not just project, but shipping in general. You're building an asset now that's going to last for another 20 odd years, right? So
that's the challenge, isn't it?
That's a challenge, right?
And making sure that it can work for that time and it will be compliant and it will be effective. And
like if you just think back a couple of years when everybody started with a very low sulfur fuel and scrubbers, et cetera, and we need this because we don't have the fuel, but ultimately the industry adapts to whatever is available. And if the regulations go, you have to do this, then, the industry will adapt. But until we are actually forced to, it becomes this, where to go, what to do, right? It's like eventually you have to put a signature under a contract to build a vessel, and then that's what it is for the next 20 years.
You can't wait for all the answers. No. Otherwise you won't build anything.
Would be great if I had all these answers, right?
And you spoke a bit about customer demand. How is customer expectation or demand changing, and how are you responding to customers' changing needs?
Changing needs, yeah, that is an interesting one, right? Again, we have, in our small niche industry, we have the problem that we, as I alluded to earlier, get compared to container carriers. And for me, if you look at containers, it's very easy. You can book something online, you just load port, discharge port, you can do that online. You can do your documentation online, you can trace the container, you have fine, I get it, right? Do you want to do that? Yeah, maybe. Feedback I hear even now in Rotterdam from some clients is, yeah, that's all fine until you have a problem or until you have an issue and until you can't talk to someone. So what we're trying to do, yes, we're trying to be very transparent and we're trying to be proactive and advise people of what's happening to their cargo, where the vessel is, et cetera, right? Yes, there will be things where you can do an online inquiry and it gets automated, but ultimately in our business, I think the answer will still be a human. You can potentially automate container quoting and all that, but doing that for what we do, a pipe is not a pipe, a coil is not a coil, right? Like a pipe on this vessel may have a different rate than on that vessel purely because of the utilization of the vessel, or the pipe is slightly longer, doesn't fit. So there's a lot of human thinking in the background where people try to assess and juggle things and all that. Then you have the other thing where, AIS is available, everybody can monitor the vessels, right? The issue with that is you don't know the background story to that. Yes, you can pinpoint the position of the vessel. If you pay enough, you can have it even on the hour. But the story on why the vessel is doing this or that is not there. So you need someone to talk to and find out. So even though we try to automate as much as we can and try to invest in IT systems that can assist, there will still be the human element. And then we're back to beginning of this, to the partnership thing, right? Like if you're open and you discuss things and you understand the needs of your partner and they understand what you are doing, a lot of things can be solved. If you just rely on computer says no, computer says yes, it gets a bit tricky, right?
We had somebody on the podcast recently complaining about the customer service of some of the shipping lines, complaining that they might have a call center in Lithuania, or it wasn't about the country, but it was the fact that you don't have somebody local. You can't just pick up the phone and get hold of somebody. How does AAL treat that aspect?
Well, that's why we do have offices all over the world, right? And
So it's not like that at AAL.
No, we don't have a call center somewhere.
But they can get hold of you. That's the point.
That's the idea.
They can
right?
call
Like,
Frank if they need to.
They can, yes, they can. But considering we do have offices in Europe and the US and in Asia everywhere, we try to have this local contact more than, it makes more sense for someone in Europe than to call someone in Europe rather than, is Frank awake now or not? Or do I wake him up? Or what's he going to say if I wake him up? He's grumpy Frank, as you said earlier. No, I don't think, and this is exactly the point. It may have a position in containers because a box is a box is a box, if I may say so. But in our business, you need to talk to the same person that knows what the problem is and needs to help you to solve that problem rather than having to explain the same story over and over again and then not get a solution.
Yeah. How would you describe your leadership style?
My personal leadership style?
Yeah.
I try to let people do what they think is right. I'm trying to be in the background, but have their back when things go wrong and help them out to solve the problems, but let them focus on the good stuff and work it out themselves. And maybe, like autonomous working for me is very big. People need to take charge of their own job, and that at the same time makes them happy in what they are doing, and they achieve something. I'm definitely not someone to micromanage. Some people say I don't even manage because I let people do what they want to do, right? There are many ways to solve a problem, and I wouldn't say that I know the answer. I can give you ideas, but if you find a different way, I'm interested in input and output. How you get there, it's sort of like I leave it up to you, because if it's up to you, you enjoy doing what you're doing, right?
And that's when they give better service too.
I think so, yeah.
They're not waiting for somebody to respond to them so they can go back to the customer.
Yeah.
They're just dealing with it.
And I'm also trying, and that's company-wide, we're trying to get people to understand what the other departments are doing and the other people are doing, and try to do office exchanges for people and even departmental exchanges. So, there can be someone in chartering that has no idea what the people in accounts are doing, or vice versa. And if you don't get the full story, your little problem might not actually be a problem if you know the full story.
And just a couple of closing questions. Give us your career highlight so far.
My career highlight. Oh, that's going to sound really weird, but it has got nothing to do with project cargo. It was my first, years and years back, bulk fixture of copper concentrate out of Port Hedland, and I had no idea about bulk. And our boss then in Australia did exactly what I just explained. He said, yeah, do what you think is right. I've got your back, just do it. And for me, because we hadn't done any bulk previously on our ships, it was a completely new thing. Just trying to find your way through that without having had any previous exposure. And it actually was successful in the end. That, for me, was, in a way, my career highlight. I know it sounds really sad, and it was, 20 years ago, but...
And your low light?
Well, that's the other one. It could also be my highlight, because my low light was leaving Germany for Australia. I decided I'm done with shipping. What I didn't realize then is I was done with container shipping, right? And the really lowest point was when I was in Australia and the only job I could find was back into shipping. I went, here we go again. But it turned out that was,
it turned out all right.
Break bulk and project shipping with AAL. So that was different to what I despised, being the container shipping, right? For me, that became too boring even after 5 years. But now, having to go back into shipping, not knowing that, it's completely different to what I was exposed to before I was, very upset initially.
And number one piece of advice for somebody starting out a career in project shipping?
It's probably the advice that I got at some stage. It's not air freight. What does that mean? You know, you have time. It's a ship. It's slow. Sit back, assess the situation, get more information, talk about it, rather than just quick, I need to get that plane, right? So in project shipping, build up your relationships with forwarders, with your competitors, with your other customers, with the ports, with everyone who's involved in the whole chain, because the more people you know, the easier it is for you to solve problems.
And lastly, I decided this morning I was going to come up with a new thing to ask people to nominate somebody else to come on the podcast. So I'd ask you to nominate anybody from the industry who you think would be an interesting person for everybody to hear.
Richard Sieg, Intermarine, New Orleans.
I met him yesterday.
There you go. He's a good friend of mine.
Frank, thanks very much.
No, thank you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Project Cargo Professionals. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to follow or subscribe so you never miss an episode. Got feedback, a guest suggestion, or a story worth telling? Don't hesitate to reach out. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, let's keep in touch. Follow me, Luke King, on LinkedIn, and explore more at projectcargopros.com.